Okay, all set. Here we go, Dad.
What inspired you to write this film and to tell this story?
My mother inspired me to write this story. And first it was a short story that came from some notes in my notebook, basically wanting to remember things I'd heard at her funeral. And flying back from that, it was a night flight, and I was writing down conversations I'd heard, little versions of stories that I knew about my mother, but they were slightly different. I thought, that's interesting how people remember the same person, the same event in slightly different ways, and they're sure that's the way it happened. You go, no, that's not, I don't think that happened quite like, you know. And so it was just, it was informing me that really memory is not so reliable at all.
Scurvy. Gwen? Gwen! God damn you, Gwen!
Dad, stop. Dad.
Don't touch me, you son of a bitch!
Okay. Let's go back to your
I'm
seat.
going upstairs and tell your mother what a little cocksucker you are.
Dad, there is no upstairs. Come on.
Gwen, come down here right now!
Dad.
I said!
Dad. This is a plane. There is no upstairs. Mom's not here.
How dementia is portrayed in the story, that's something I've had a lot of experience with. Both my mom, my dad, my stepdad, some of my grandparents, aunts, uncles. With my parents and my stepdad, especially my mother and father, I was with them a lot, even in a caregiving kind of role. In terms of movies that I've seen some really good ones, some plays too, like The Father. Those movies, as good as they might be, those stories, generally they're showing the person with dementia or Alzheimer's as confused, right? Or their point of view, if they show it, is of a confused person. And that's not my experience. My experience is that the people who are confused are the observers generally, you know. People taking care of them are the family members. They're confused. And the only time they're really unusually confused or upset is if you correct them. Like someone they're talking about, like they've just seen, and you know they died 30 or 40 years ago, and you say, no, Mom, you know, she died, you know, like, I think 36 years ago or so. Then they get upset. Then they relive that death, and it's terrible. And if they're still in the early stages and they suddenly snap out of it, they're like, feel stupid. So you're really not doing them any favors. But that's a learning experience for that person who's around someone has that.
I know what you're up to. You've cooked this whole thing up with your sister. You want to take advantage because you think I've lost my marbles. But I didn't. The bank's closed now, but I'll straighten this whole mess out in the morning. It will be a cold day in hell when I let you pull the wool over your mother's eyes.
If you have a great actor like Lance who can give you these ways of reacting that are surprising, going in and out of different mental states, with all of that, you can actually show someone who's not confused, who just has a different point of view.
Hey, Bree.
Once I'd written the script, Lance Henriksen was willing to do it. I didn't tell him I didn't have the money. I just said, I'm just going to start shooting now. I'm going to shoot this spring, summer, fall, different periods. We're going to find the farm. We're going to start getting this library of images, what you see all as nature shots and shots around the farm. And I said, are you still game to do the movie? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, what was that pause? You don't have to do it. It's not like forced labor. It's if you want to do it. But he said, no, because it's going to be difficult, but it's going to be difficult, especially because I'm going to have to, I never want to be caught acting, and it has to be real for me. So to make it real, I'm going to have to explore things about my childhood, you know, like memories of my parents, my upbringing. And I said, oh. And then he started to tell me stories about that, and they were horror stories. They were horrible. I mean, he was like constantly, they were drunk and then throwing him out. And, you know, like, there was one event, this is an example. He's like 5, 6 years old maybe, and his mom, really drunk one night, and she wanted to party with some guy, and she goes, "This is your birth certificate, so you'll always remember who you are." And then she spun him around and pushed him out, winter night, New York City, and partied for a few days, and he was on the street. And I said, it's remarkable how you're sort of laughing about this, and you're telling me these really terrible, you know, it makes Dickens look like Mary Poppins or something, or, you know. So it was a wonderful, wonderful experience, preparing it and working, especially with him, but all the actors. The casting of the actors was great fun, and all those kids, you know, that they had to be me at different ages. You had to believe it physically, this evolution of this person, but they also had to be good. And same with Sarah, the Laura Linney's part, my sister, you know. So that was very tricky, all that, but I really enjoyed the process of finding the actors. And you have to be lucky too. I mean, I was lucky I ran across Hannah Gross, who plays Gwen, who's for me the conscience of the story, the mother in a way. Even though it became a fictional story about a father and a son, the inspiration was my mother, and she's kind of that figure, that female figure is who these two men are mostly at odds about, you know.
What goes into the research process or the due diligence in order to kind of represent these stories authentically?
The idea was, above all, to just show a family model that was different, where people listen to each other and resolve their differences through communication and empathy, which is different than the traditional old school model that Willis, extreme one of those, has, which is he's the patriarch and what he says goes, and he doesn't adapt or evolve in any relationship he has, either with his wife or his kids, to changing times, to changing people. The main thing I wanted to get across with the family of Eric, John, and Monica, and as far as what kind of gay relationship and family or parents, I wanted it to be almost not boring necessarily, but very ordinary, very like, you know, and not perfect, you know. I mean, certainly you could almost see from Willis's point of view sometimes, these guys are like so nitpicky and perfect and politically correct, and they're speaking this horrible Spanish to their adopted, you know, Central American daughter. It's like, it just makes you want to puke. You don't have to show all that, but you can just imagine what Willis thinks about it. But then he surprises you by, that's his best friend in the world, is his granddaughter. And she doesn't judge him. She finds him amusing and accepts him as he is, which is part of John's lesson. It's not just that Willis has to accept John as he is, as a gay man, as different than what he expected his son to turn out to be, kind of man, and so forth. John has to accept what his father is and where he wants to be and how he is.
For me, the big question that's sort of asked is, how can we have compassion for people whose differences are unlike our own, especially if it's family, specifically if it's family? And I feel like that really seems to speak to this moment we're in, particularly in America where the film is set. I mean, how much of that was intended with this story as you started to lay it out and to realize it?
Well, I think not just the United States, or I think everywhere, it's just human nature. I think tribalism is something, fear of the other, ignorance, fear, and the hatred and violence, psychological or physical, that it produces, since humans have existed. It's each generation has to figure out how to deal with it if they are going to. Each person has to learn to not be afraid of other people who are different, or they don't. So it's like you can make all the laws you want, make all the progress you want, but racism, homophobia, misogyny, misanthropy is something that's always going to be around and has to be worked at. That's part of being alive. And so when I was writing the story, it was speaking about the United States in particular. It was when Trump was campaigning. But polarization had always been around, you know, and even during Obama's 8 years, obviously there was this constant, we're going to say no to whatever he wants, we're going to imply he's not American, these veiled or not so veiled racist kind of attacks and lies about him, so forth, and his family and just black people generally, police violence against black communities. I mean, it's not like it's suddenly happened now. This has been going on as part of the history of the United States. And I think that polarization and in society, it's almost like another kind of virus. Like I say, it's always there, there's a potential for an outbreak, right? And I would say that that's the other pandemic in the United States. The outbreak of polarization is as serious a threat as COVID-19, and it will last longer. And then as I started to rewrite and was trying to find the money, by the time we got the money, or I started shooting the stuff, the memory shots, and that was 2018, it was clear what we were dealing with. I thought, I'm going to set the present in the beginning of Obama's term. So the present in the movie in Falling is 2009, early 2009, as opposed to 2018 or 19. Not because I didn't want people to relate to society, the family story, I think any family story you're going to, in a book or a movie or a play, it always can serve as a microcosm or a mirror of what's happening in society in general. So I think that's positive, I think it's interesting. But if I said it right now, you'd kind of, anything that Willis did, you'd instantly going there. I'd like it to be more balanced, where you're really looking at this family and these characters.
We should get his colonoscopy done as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Just a moment. I'm going to check my schedule, and I'll see if we can fit you in this week. I'll be right back.
A notable part of the movie for any sort of film buff is that you have David Cronenberg in a cameo role as a proctologist. How was it recruiting him to do this role? And second of all, did he give you any advice?
It was, well, he's given me advice, not so much by what he said, but by his example for years, you know, in terms of how to prepare, shoot, how to communicate with the crew and actors. He was very easy to work with, very, I wouldn't say, he was obedient. Well, he knew what he was doing. I didn't really have to do much, and that's what working with him, unless something really needed fixing, he would let the actors, he counted on that he'd cast the movie properly. And he's very good at casting and always felt like that's half the job or more. And there was only one time I had the temerity to sort of, not question something, but bring something to his attention, and it was when he had this lavender-colored glove on, and he's about to, you know, do the examination. He's about to insert, and I said, and we were just about to shoot it, and I was looking through the, you know, monitor, and I went back. I said, well, I don't know, you're probably aware of this, but with this particular lens, and where you're positioning, rather than here, where you're positioning your hand, it makes that finger look twice as long. I mean, it's really enormous on the. So, and he goes, I'm aware of that. I said, of course you are. Anyway, let's shoot.
Like, okay, we'll do that then.
And it wouldn't have been the same without it being David, obviously.
Yeah, it's perversely appropriate casting.
That's it. That's good. Best perversely appropriate casting of 2020.
Viggo Mortensen, thank you so much for
It's been a pleasure.
talking with me for so long, and congratulations again on Falling. Your beautiful debut.